Our program today has touched on some of the fundamental development needs of Egypt and how entrepreneurship can address those needs. Um, in a word, I think we'd all agree there's a consensus from this morning that it's jobs. Uh, Egypt's not alone in facing this challenge. We certainly face it here and today. We just heard we got a pretty, again, flat job creation in the United States. It's not happening as fast as we'd like. It's hard. But one of the aspects of the United States, my culture, our culture, is that we value reform, we value change. We have this notion in our culture that things can always get better. So you're always striving to find ways to make it better, whatever it is that you're doing. This isn't always true. It sure hit me hard when I left the American government and went to work for the UN for a 3-year stint. That was not shared there. There were entrenched cultural, in the UN cultural, managerial, cultural, to not change, to not shake the boat, to not disrupt that status quo. And another thing that we heard this morning is that that is also one of the obstacles to innovation in Egypt. So we're going to talk about that a little bit this afternoon. To try to pull it together, we're going to peer into the future. We've got two incredibly amazing entrepreneurs to speak to us this afternoon during lunch. And I'm very pleased to welcome Rana Elkaliouby and Christopher Schroeder. Rana is the Chief Strategy and Scientific Officer at Affectiva. Affectiva. It's a firm that provides emotional analytical solutions to measuring and improving the impact of online content. Her postdoctoral work at MIT was on perceptual computing, facial expression analytics, and emotion science. I don't even know what that means. I thought emotions and science were contradictory, but I would appreciate maybe she can tell us a little bit more about it. I think it's fascinating. Chris is an active investor, and he's an advisor to several venture capital firms and dozens of social media startups. He's had a career in finance. He's worked at the White House under George Herbert Walker Bush and at the State Department, and we sort of followed probably there at the same time in both events. Rana and Chris know each other, and they know Egypt, and they know innovation, and we're going to have a conversation, a chat for the rest of this session. And I'm going to turn the floor over to them right now, but let me ask a couple of questions. First to you, Rana. We talked a lot this morning about culture and the impact of culture in Egypt that pushes young people into certain very prescribed, prestigious careers. Engineering, medicine, teaching was, I guess, down at the bottom. Even day laborers don't want to do day labor work, we learned today. My answer to that is pay them more. Salaries, wages always is a good incentive. But what do you see is happening? What's the environment for innovation as you see it today in Egypt?
Turn this on. Okay, better. Yeah, so as Wendy said, so I'm an Egyptian. I grew up in the Middle East, moved to England for my PhD work at Cambridge University, and then moved to MIT about 10 years ago now, did a lot of research there before spinning out a company. So I kind of straddled the academic world and the business world. And really, when I graduated, I was an AUCN as well. I know a couple of people here went to AUC as undergrads. And I know that the culture back then, which is about 15 years ago, aging myself here, there was no real culture around startups. Like, it was not the cool thing to do to join a startup. And I think there's a cultural shift. I think there's a lot more interest. There's a lot more understanding of what it is to work in a startup. There's a lot more passion around starting companies. And I think that paired with progress in general around the entire ecosystem. So there's a lot more understanding of what entrepreneurship is. There's a lot more talent. There's a lot more investors, both angel and venture capitalists. There's more accelerator programs. There's organizations like Rise Egypt, as well as Tekwedi, which I co-chair, and many others that are supporting and playing different pieces, filling different pieces of this puzzle of entrepreneurship in the region, and in Egypt in particular. So it's exciting times, I think.
Mona noted that 3 of the 5 young entrepreneurs that have joined us today are women. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody who's ever been to Egypt that Egypt has a reputation, and in fact, of being one of the countries in the world where women are most harassed in the street, where women have the most difficulty in public situations. How does this impact women entrepreneurs? Clearly, judging from your career train, it hasn't impacted you at all, but you've largely been in Britain and the United States doing this. I'd like to ask you that question, but then if perhaps some of our young female entrepreneurs could also share their views on it too, it would be interesting.
I would actually also like Chris's view, because Chris has spent a lot of time in the region, and I know you've talked a lot about women entrepreneurship, or women entrepreneurs as well. But I'll share my own personal story. So as I said, I grew up in the Middle East, and my parents invested in our education. Like, it was a top priority, and I think that made a world of a difference to me and to my kids, and to, just where I ended up doing and what I ended up doing. So I think education is critical. I think you run into a lot of naysayers. When I finished my undergraduate degree and wanted to go to Cambridge to do my PhD degree, a lot of people around me were like, "What? You just got married. You should stick with your husband. You're not going anywhere." And I was like, and actually my husband was like, "Go to England, like, go do this." I don't know. He probably regrets it now, but whatever. So I think you need to be persistent. You need to be passionate. You need to just go do it. So to those people who harass us in the streets, like, just ignore them and just focus on the things where you can make a difference, would be my position.
And in the workplace, in Egypt, maybe some of our young entrepreneurs could comment on that. Have you encountered problems from not just male colleagues, but other businessmen that you encounter? Any comments? Microphone. Here's a microphone. Here's a microphone. Yeah.
I guess I think no, because basically what happens is that we know that there is a risk of harassment, but basically I would say that yes, the street is, for me, it affects me more than because I don't like to drive. So I get along a lot in the streets, and yes, that is the thing that bothers me a lot. But
I love United States, of course. The only thing that I love that I can walk on the street without anyone looking at me. Yeah. That's the most impressive point that I had in any other country other than Egypt.
I'll leave the street thing aside, and I'll be very honest. I think that being a female has been a privilege for me, because again, it's also become fancy, and there are a lot of opportunities now for females, because the narrative is that females are underrepresented, and so on and so forth. And again, statistics, I know statistics prove that, but for me, I never really suffered from being a female. I've been generally discouraged, but I know that my male partners have been discouraged as well. So for me, I'm perfectly aware that just being a female has actually helped me. It has contributed to the story being a bit more dramatic, and I'm perfectly aware of that. And to be honest, like, I studied engineering, so I was in a male-dominant environment. I worked in telecommunications industry in a male-dominant environment. It didn't really matter. Now we operate in a very low-income neighborhood that is famous for selling drugs, and again, it didn't matter. And you go into these communities and you actually see the people who are suffering, and you see the women who are actually going through much, much more challenges than just not being able to walk on the street. So the woman who has to raise the kids, who has to work, who has to sometimes even educate herself. So for me, I think I've had it fairly easy. Yeah.
Okay, and by the way, I'm often asked as one of the first women ambassadors in the American Foreign Service the same question, and I had the same answer. It's actually been easier being a woman. So thank you for your perspectives. Chris, about a year ago, you wrote that the regulatory structures in Egypt have made it more difficult for innovation, particularly in telecommunications or communications, where most people now communicate with their handheld devices and through the web. Can you comment on that? What's it look like today? We had some comments this morning on it, but has it gotten any better? There's been a lot of talk from politicians and the current government about trying to promote investment and focusing as a first priority on the economy. Is it just talk, or is it actually getting better?
So first of all, Wendy, I just want to thank you and Mona for doing this. I can tell you that today in Washington, D.C., there may be 10 think tanks that are talking about the Middle East, and 9 of them are talking about ISIS, and 1 is talking about hopeful, unbelievable women doing amazing things, and it's you guys doing it. And I think it's just awesome.
Yeah.
Secondly, if I could just digress 2 seconds on the women thing, because this exchange cracks me up no end, because she didn't mention, I wrote a book about startups and entrepreneurship in the Middle East, came out last year, called Startup Rising, which I really urge all of you to order. It's great summer reading, and just everyone here. But I'm actually not saying it for the reason you think. I'm actually giving all the proceeds of the book away to a social enterprise in the Middle East called Rawad, which is just doing amazing things now in Cairo, started in Jordan and in Palestine and Tripoli, Lebanon. It's just an unbelievable gig. So you buy your books and $2 go to this, and I'd be very appreciative of that. But one of the things that I did in the book is I just give a tour of the regulatory environment, but the startups and the fact that technology is changing the game so much in the region. But I have a chapter on women in the region. And what was wonderful for me is when I went to interview women about the very question that Wendy asked, it all played out like this. I had about half the women come to me and say, so you're going to write a chapter on women? And they're like, yeah. And we're like, we're not going to talk to you if you put us in the women chapter. We are not women entrepreneurs. We are entrepreneurs. If you want to talk about our companies, I'll talk about your company. But if you're going to do that gringo thing and stick us into a chapter about women, we're done. And I'm like, okay. Then I talked to another group of women and say, look, let's be realistic. We have challenges here. They are worth talking about. We're happy to talk about you. So if you read my book, you'll see which women got into my grid and I pulled out, and the others are there. But I think what is important to underscore in this, and you touched on it, Wendy, what Economist says there are 25% women in startups and technology startups in the Middle East, and I think the number is closer to 10% in Silicon Valley. And I've judged startup competitions where it's 45% that are women. And the one thing that women across the spectrum said to me in the book, which resonated to me, and they said to me, look, the definition of entrepreneurship is your ability to constantly work around problems. And we're pretty good at that. And I think that in fact, captures something that's pretty powerful along the spectrum overall. Look, ecosystems for technology thrive when in those ecosystems you can move people, ideas, and goods. If you can move people, ideas, and goods, you have a flywheel of success where more companies will breed more companies and more success will come and more innovation will come. I mean, it's not a lot more complicated than that. And unfortunately, across most of the Middle East, up until recently, and I'm going to give a caveat, it was, for example, easier to ship a book from Dubai to Lebanon through New York, or to buy it directly from New York than it was simply to move it from, say, Dubai to Lebanon, or pick whatever 2 countries. The laws and regulations were so complicated for any, I mean, if Jeff Bezos tried to invent Amazon and had to move through 50 states of regulations like what individual states have there, it just would not be tenable. The ability to move becomes very easy, difficult. The ability to start up a company if you don't have ownership of the local people becomes very difficult. This is all headwinds to the potential of innovation and the kinds of activities that these women and other people are doing overall. But to my earlier observation, this phenomenon of people building companies is very bottom up. Folks are working around and not waiting for governance, they're just building. 2, as a cautionary note, it's the most mobile generation in the history of the world, not just in the Middle East. And so it comes as no but interesting surprise that more and more young people from around the region are gravitating to Dubai, because Dubai and the UAE generally has done some amazing things in rule of law to help people move and ideas move and products move overall. And third, therefore, it is an enormous opportunity for places like Egypt if they begin to take seriously how the rule of law can literally put gasoline into these opportunities so that they can build effects to build these companies and create jobs. The jury is frankly still out, in my view, in pretty much every other country. The King of Jordan has been very impressive in supporting ICT for the last 10 years, certainly in education and other ways. But that's a relatively small market of very talented engineers. I think the UAE is one of the most exciting places to watch and are taking this as seriously as you could. And I hope that Egypt is paying attention, because I am a little bit under the philosophy that as goes Egypt, can go the region.
Yeah.
And so I hope that they take this as the opportunity that it offers.
You want to comment on that? No, I think this was great. Yeah, I think we could all agree that the 5 young people that we've had here this morning talking to us are change agents. Several of them, and I think all of them would agree that that a measure of their success is because they haven't worked with the government. They're working outside the government. They're just doing their thing. I heard those words said this morning several times. But the obstacles that everyone pointed out, particularly on the first panel, were government obstacles, were regulations, were this huge public bloated bureaucracy where you have 53 steps for a license to go through, each one touched by an official, and each time it's touched, there might be a little stuff that gets left behind. We were talking about the corruption and that sort of thing. Yet, the public sector is one of the major employers in Egypt today. And what I'm getting at is we have the change agents. Where's the change manager? Because anybody, and now it's President Sisi, who's in charge of a government, is going to come running smack up against these entrenched interests. And we all know who they are and where they are, but one of them is the public sector bureaucracies. What are the tricks to try to get a culture of change management, to try to encourage tackling some of the obstacles that were brought out this morning, but quite frankly, are pretty evident to a lot of people in Egypt, including the government?
Go ahead. So
It's a tough one.
I start where you pointed out, and I touched on before, but was said brilliantly before. I mean, you think about even some of the great successful, really not just game-changing as companies, but they're changing the way we think of each other and how we engage with each other and how we share in America. I mean, you look at Uber and you look at Airbnb. These folks just came. Now, their number one challenge now is the regulatory environment, even here in America, and they're spending lots of time and money to go up against the forces that they have both in bureaucracy and people who are lobbying against them. But the fact is, like the young women spoke earlier before, they just did. They didn't sort of sit around wringing their hands asking for permission. They built under the thesis that success can breed success. And at some point, the regulators should come along. Having said that, the fact of the matter is that it's very cumbersome in a lot of places. Egypt, as many people know, it's actually a criminal act to go bankrupt. There's not a bankruptcy law there. I've never met an entrepreneur who's ever said to me, I'm thinking about the bankruptcy law. So at one level, it's irrelevant to the starting of a great new idea. But of course, it can have huge ramifications on the ability to fail and move quickly, which is essential as people try to build things overall. But I really think the essence of this is leadership, because this is the most autodidact, bottom-up phenomenon in the history of the world. What's happening, what these women are talking about, and what's happening around the Middle East and around all emerging growth markets and around the world is the most autodidact and bottom-up phenomenon. And I think much will move despite the top-down institutions, but they're not going away. And I think that the top-down institutions can have huge ramifications in helping these young people, and it will take leaders like Sisi and his people to say, this matters to me. And the way, candidly, forgive me for coming back to it, but the UAE has come out and said, we are going to be building the 2020, 2030 innovation for the region here. I think other people will have to join that in their own version of it. Otherwise, talent will move.
Well, and you notice that the UAE is making a huge investment in Egypt itself.
Exactly.
A huge investment, and particularly in the economy, which is what the leader, President Sisi, has said is his first priority. But we also heard this morning that foreign investment and business climate and business growth can be very much depressed by uncertainty. And uncertainty in Egypt today, let's be frank, is security. You know, if you own a KFC franchise, you certainly know that. So that seems to be where leadership is putting its attention, maybe in the name of trying to develop economy, but it's putting its attention on security. Is that counterproductive?
Again, I think my view would be you got to focus. It's very easy to get distracted with all the things that are happening around us. So, for example, Affectiva, which is my spin out of MIT, has a small office in Cairo, and it's an amazing, super committed, super talented team. And a group of them are highly educated engineers or software engineers that we've recruited out of the top universities, but we've also hired underprivileged women who we saw an opportunity to train them to do some work for us in a very kind of cost-effective way for a US company. And I think, I always get that question from our board, like, are you sure we can have an office in Cairo? Like, we watch the news and it's really scary. Yes, it is really scary, but guess what? People have to live, they just have to go about their daily lives. And I think at some point you just have to shut down or shut off all these distractions and just focus on getting stuff done. So that's my philosophy. Otherwise, it gets really depressing, I think.
Chris, you want to comment on that?
Just look, emerging growth markets and revolutionary change, which is happening in not just, we tend to think revolutions happen in a week and then that's a revolution. And in fact, we're in a revolutionary period. This is not for the faint of heart. There's some people who realize that most of the economic growth is going to come from emerging growth markets and that there'll be risks embedded that they have to assess and they will decide to invest, and other people will not. And this is going to take time. The gringos forget that the time between the signing of the Declaration of Independence and the signing of the United States Constitution was 12 years. And they forget that, in fact, the Constitution wasn't ratified till 2.5 years after that. And these things take time. And I think what you're seeing, though, is that the power of the things that you saw of what the women are unleashing before, the power of what Rana was talking about right now, has lots and lots of people saying, you want to know something? There are going to be things to navigate, but things are there forever. And we are just going to have to figure out to be a part of this forever and not run in and out because there are going to be challenges. Because look at, who would have thought America would come to the precipice 5 years ago? The world's not a fun and easy place. So I think at the end of the day, much, much more people there are two things I would leave you with on that. More and more people are saying we have to engage in the world on the world's terms in a reciprocal sense and not a me sense. And the second thing, which I think the smart Americans anyways are paying attention to, if we don't, others will. I can tell you, I just came back from Egypt and I just came back from Iran. And I saw Chinese everywhere. I saw Indians everywhere. I saw Germans everywhere. I saw Scandinavians everywhere. This is the world, and there'll be risk associated with it, but they're navigatable.
Yeah, well, I liked that answer. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. We talked this morning about what corporations can do. We talked about CRS, corporate responsibility. Which firms in Egypt are doing the best jobs?
So I'll talk about one particular example. So I co-chair Tekwedi, which is Arabic for Silicon Valley, and essentially it's an organization, non-for-profit organization that is based in the US, and its mission is to create bridges between Silicon Valley and tech entrepreneurs and professionals in the Arab region. So it's a network of these amazing Arab professionals around the world with a heavy base in Silicon Valley, and it's got an accelerator program. But one of the things we've done is we've partnered with Google. So Google has a Google for Entrepreneurs program, and they are really, really, really interested in seeing us help the region and create, new initiatives, support new startups. So I would say, Google's been an amazing partner for us. And then there's a number of other organizations there as well. And I think there's more understanding from these tech